Good morning. One second. Hope you're good. I've been wanting to rant about this for a bit, but not feeling it very well. But that's okay. I'll just get it happening and let's see how we go. But I just thought, look, I was going to do like a proper full reaction. I hate reactions, but I think a lot of the reaction to Zuckerberg and a lot of these things, I've actually started to be more observant about, like, basically what garbage people most commentators are, for a start. How quickly people just fall in line, like with talking points. And when you actually know a lot of it, how clear it becomes with a lot of this space, a lot of the talking, political commentary or whatever the fuck you want to call it, commentary, reaction, that sort of stuff, which is that a lot of it is just people talking shit that they don't know anything about. And I think that when you actually work in tech, or you've built product, or you understand the complexity of the problems, or in my case, all three, like you understand the political and policy implications, plus having built tech and all those sorts of things, that I understand the bind that Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, Google, all those tech companies have, and they're all unique problems across the platform. So there's no big monolith as big tech, okay, necessarily. Okay, there is no such that's where you head into sort of conspiratorial or conspiracy thinking, is when you start to think of single companies, or even a single company, okay, as a monolith, let alone several companies in an industry as a monolith. Okay, people, when you start to think of any kind of group as a monolith, that's when your thinking is not clear. Yes, in order to communicate, we need to make generalizations, okay? We need to cope. In order to, get through our day, we need to simplify or make, generalizations. Or for economy of language, like on Twitter particularly, okay? We wouldn't get anything done if everything was, written by a lawyer with a bunch of different exclusions and conditions and all those sorts of things, okay? But at the same time, like, it's just if you just sit back with this, when you see something that's in your area of expertise that's sort of dragged into this sort of culture war bullshit that's coming out of America and increasingly here as well. But once you start to pay attention and you see something that you know a lot about dragged in, whether it's healthcare, whether it's, the pandemic, whether it's, gender issues, feminism, race, anything that you have a particular area of expertise in. And when I say expertise, I mean you're a scholar and an expert or a practitioner in an area. I'm not saying you are that person, okay? I'm not. They're not. You're an expert on you. You're not an expert on a topic necessarily. Okay. But when you see your own area of expertise dragged into this sort of react mill, okay, the content factory that is, left versus right in the culture wars, you really do start to see very clearly that there's a certain type of non-thinking person, certain type of sort of garbage human, okay, people who lie, and also people who don't actually know what they're talking about, but they just fall into talking points and then present it as though it's fact and present it as though it's expertise. But what you'll also see, there's an undercurrent in, especially in the media class, and especially in the, failed media class, as in failed comedian does a podcast, failed fucking journalist does their own Substack, failed person does, X, Y, Z, okay? They kind of sidestep into the content factory, present themselves as an expert, but they present themselves as an expert in all things. Now, that's one thing that, you've got to give Joe Rogan, is that I don't think he ever presents himself as anything. I mean, he's glib about his influence, but at the same time, he never presents himself as an expert. But a lot of these fucking people, like, it doesn't matter what side they're on, right? But particularly on the left, I see why people hate fucking left-wing commentators. They're the most arrogant, like stuffy, bad faith. And there's this whole subtext, especially in sort of the YouTube space, right, of these commentators who claim expert, but they're just mean. They're just mean girls. They're mean people. And I've been sort of thinking a bit about this lately, about my own relationship with the internet, and that I have to just let go of pre-2010. Like pre-2010 internet is gone. It's gone. You can keep going on about how it's changed. It's like, well, no, the mean girls took over. The people that I initially got online in the 90s and early 2000s to escape have now taken over. And people like me and people, weirdos and experts and people like us, the nerds that did sort of use the internet to find each other, we are now sidelined, and it has been taken over by these like high school bullies that most of us were trying to escape. And that there's nothing more glaring, I think, when you start to see, I've said this about sort of Elon Musk as well and Mark Zuckerberg, but there's this whole subtext with the left mean girls, okay? And they're just high school bullies, okay, where they think that they're hiding the fact that they just don't like the weird nerds, okay? But they think that because they're a billionaire, or that because they're somehow, they're powerful or they've got influence or whatever, that no one can see through. If you've been that you can't see through the fact that they're actually just bad faith bullies who don't like the weird nerd kids. And you see that just play out, much like I've talked about before with sort of young women and that whole JK, that whole, oh, mum, Mickey, it's like you've clearly got mother issues. If your reaction is visceral, okay, like over something that's a disagreement, first of all, you're probably likely, a conspiracist, not an empiricist. Second of all, there are tells. And if you've been on the receiving end of these kids, or, that grew up into being adults that are the exact same high school bullies that most of us tried to escape, that were, the people that built the internet for these fuckheads to then take over, start dictating what the rules were, and then start just ragging on the weird kids, but calling it class analysis, but it's not, because ultimately, you're not hiding it. Some of us can see. It's like I can be a critic of Mark Zuckerberg because, first of all, I'm in the industry. Second of all, my comments are not basically, he's just fucking weird. Why is he so weird? Why is he like a robot? He's such a robot. Why is he so weird? And it's just like, really? Is that your hot take, is it? Person with a million, I love how they're like, oh, Joe Rogan doesn't understand his influence on people. He doesn't understand the impact. Well, what about the impact that you and your million fucking subscribers have every time you rag on the nerd and call it social justice? Of course not, because that would mean you'd have to look at yourself. And that's the business of people who do reactions and nothing but react and react and react. They're bullies. They're people that are addicted to reacting and not really interested in thinking. And nothing that you'll see when you see people ragging on tech, and especially when you'll see someone like Tim Pool put up against someone like Jack, is that the intellectual powerhouse that you want to have a conversation about Twitter censorship? Again, I'm gonna point it out rhetorically and say, look, because I know why the answer is, but I'm going to say it rhetorically, fellas, rhetorical, which is just pay attention to the fact that there's no real people who know their theory talking about these issues. There's no people who actually read and understand these things in good faith. All they do is they just fall into line on one side or the other in terms of talking points, okay, knowing full well that the traditional media, corporate media, has, and that's, the corporate media is a term, okay, corporate media is, hang on a second, I'm not going to look at that. But the people in the corporate media, there's an obvious war on big tech coming from Murdoch. Okay, so it's obvious, and it's just like, okay, well, if you don't understand the history and the relationships and the political dynamics and the lawsuits that are happening, I talked about this with all the Twitter bans. If you don't understand all of that landscape, it's interesting how nobody ever talks to people who actually know what they're talking about. And the fact and the way that Mark Zuckerberg's clip was sort of taken out of context in that way, and it just turned into, oh, he admitted it. He admitted, what did he admit? Did you catch him, did you? From the thing that they've been saying for like 5 years that they're going to do, and they've implemented and done and continue to report on. And if you actually read something for fucking 2 minutes, you'd know that he admitted nothing, because it's known that law enforcement, and this is an interagency, interdisciplinary problem, okay, multidisciplinary problem, a global problem, one of manipulation, and it's coming mostly from the fucking Fox News network, okay? So anyway, so let me have a look at this. Tetris toast. To willfully misunderstand your impact is to be confronted with the burden of responsibility for said impact. I don't know what that means. Okay. Let's start.
When we take down something that we're not supposed to, I mean, that is like, that's the worst. I mean,
how
that's
do you
like
discern? Like how, like say like these Christian Facebook pages, I don't know how they found out that 19 of 20 were fake, but if someone just says, I am Bob Smith, and they post as Bob Smith, and they have a photograph, but really what they're doing is trying to talk shit about Joe.
Okay. So this is, first up, we know how they know. And this is, again, one of my critiques of Joe Rogan, is the fact that he could actually look this stuff up. It's actually not that difficult to find out how they know that you're human. They do know. But I've said this like several times, hundreds and hundreds of different signals, you know, the anonymity of the account, the age of the account, the conduct of the account, who the other accounts are connected to, whether those accounts are connected to known troll farms. Like, I actually empathize with Mark Zuckerberg in a lot of this stuff, because he has to sit here and explain shit to like people who just don't even bother to do their basic research. Okay, like this is really basic stuff, as in maybe I should spend 10 minutes reading something on how they determine who owns an account. They run a Facebook. If you run a Facebook page, you need to have a Facebook account. They have various checks in place to check whether you are who you say you are. Okay, they don't require you to have ID, but if they suspect that you don't, that you're not legit, then they will request that. And you know, there's all of these processes in place. And I know that that this is the trap. This is the trap of the content factory. Okay, which is that you have to constantly explain basic shit to the lowest common denominator for people who won't look anything up and who will never put any effort in. And that's the main criticism of Joe Rogan, is because we know that most of the people that watch him don't even bother to look stuff up. They won't. And that's the thing, is so what he says, it's like, well, what he says might be like ridiculous to most people who read, and most people who actually look stuff up. But it looks to me like a lot of Rogan's audience come to him for, the sort of feedback and confirmation like bias. They're not there to actually, they're not curious. They don't look stuff up, because if they did, okay, now again, as I've said before, people use his podcast in various ways. They use all media in that way, okay? People use the Fox. There's an internal memo around Fox News where they said, watch out for, certain guests, because they have a tendency to, proliferate disinformation by you having them on, right? Like manipulating the media, like we've talked about this before with the mass formation psychosis. It's not so much even, the person who's saying the term. It's all of the organized, whack-a-mole websites and all these this phony crap that's underneath, all these tactics that no one pays attention to, that exploit that. So it's not necessarily Joe Rogan's fault, but he needs to be aware of it and more cautious about these things, okay? And so I get that he's just sort of going in with a conversation, but there comes a point where, why of all of the fucking questions is he asking about Hunter Biden's laptop? Who gives a fuck? Okay, the reason why is because he's pandering to a certain crowd who don't read. Because anybody who saw what happened with that laptop story, which we all saw, which was everywhere, by the way, it wasn't that suppressed, because I fucking knew it happened, and I'm in Australia, okay? Wasn't that suppressed, okay? But also, like, the fact that it's like there's a whole anyway, let's just move on. So I just want to say, like, just from the outset, and I know that this was part of a 3-hour conversation, I wanted to do I want to try and figure out a way. I mean, there's no way to do this without it being my full-time job, and I can't afford for it to be my full-time job. But, you know, I would have liked to have gone through the whole stream and bit by bit and talked about the whole thing, because it was a lot of really interesting stuff. Not just to react, but actually to give you an explanation or maybe some liner notes. But this is where it becomes a bit tricky, because I'm not sure what the copyright implications are, you know, and like, yeah, so I'm not big enough to fight those things. So I was like, okay, let it go. So I'll react to the clip that everyone else is and assume that that's fine. Okay. But do watch the whole 3 hours. And I'm happy to talk about any sort of specific parts of the interview. If you can remember any and you're here, if you can remember anything that you saw and you want me to address, then I will. But, you know, again, these things, you know, the liars and the bad faith bullies are the ones that get the money, and the people who love like that. It's so obvious that they're just using social justice or the guise of social justice to just rag on the weird kid. And it's just so plain as day. Anyway, but yes, we know. This is one of my frustrations, I think, with the Rogan universe in general, or just in general, American thinkers, okay, thunkers, is this where they say something like it's a profound rhetorical question, like, but how on earth do we determine what's real and what's fake? Well, we know. For the most part, we know. Like, that's one thing where you don't let Facebook off the hook, and you don't let, especially Twitter, off the hook, because Twitter know how fake a lot of their stuff is. There's a business interest in them not really, you know, fighting it. That said, Facebook are probably more good faith about that stuff, okay? But, like, going in with these weird questions, it's like they're answered. There's a process. If you look it up, you go, okay, they're doing it in this way. Actually, let me just, okay, well, you know, let's screen share, okay? Am I going to be able to resume? No. Actually, no, let's watch I didn't really plan this, did I? Hang on. Okay, if the video goes and I have to go back, then forgive me. I'm still trying to figure out a workflow where I can easily control the videos and react and stuff. Hang on one sec. Let me just... it did that. It did, didn't it? Fuck. Hang on.
How do you know?
So how do you know? How can we possibly know? Okay. It doesn't let me change without Elon. Okay, that's all right. So we'll work through it. Okay. Fuck this shit. Okay, so.
And Twitter, because Elon asked Twitter, like, what percentage of your website is filled with bots? And they say 5%. And he says, I don't believe you. I think it's higher. And let's find out how you've come to this conclusion. Yeah. And, you know, I believe they said that they just took 100 random Twitter pages and looked at the interaction, and there's some sort of an algorithm they applied to it. But how do you discern?
Yeah, so I mean, I think estimating the overall prevalence is one thing, but I think that the question of looking at a page and is this page authentic, I think that there's a bunch of signals around that. One of the things that we try to do is for large pages, we try to make sure that we know who the admin of that page is. We don't necessarily, you should be able to run an anonymous page. You don't necessarily need to out yourself and say who you are running it, but we want to make sure that we sort of have like an identity for that person on file, so that way we know, like at least behind the scenes, that that person is real.
Can I just point out how fucking lowball this, who doesn't know this? And this is why I sit there and I go, I'm not saying you shouldn't explain things. Like, this is one of my issues, I think, with user experience in general, is that I think we set the bar too low. There's a Bible in user experience called "Don't Make Me Think," and it used to be like the catch cry, don't make me click, don't make me do any work, don't put friction between you and the user. And I think that what we've done by appealing to, fucking year 9, like people who don't even have a year 9 understanding of these things, it means that the conversation never gets out of there. And that's the trap of this content factory in general, is that you spend so much time explaining the basics to idiots who don't read. And I mean, it's not hard to know. And I mean, it's not like Facebook needs to be explained to people. If you are an admin of a community or a page and you're running, especially one that grows quickly or one that has influence or one that's in certain areas, okay, they will verify that you have an account. Like, Facebook is 15 years old at this, like, it's like, this is where it's like, okay, this is a more broad point, which is that we have to talk about how the stupidest Americans set the tone of conversation, and we must all lower ourselves to that level of understanding in order to have a conversation. It's like, well, no, I don't. There's certain things that can't be explained at that level. If you don't know that, that it's easy to detect these things. Now, there's things that I can explain, but it's not complicated stuff. Like, yeah, you need a Facebook account, a personal Facebook account linked to an ad thing. We have ad policies. We have an ad library. We have all of these processes in place. It's like, okay, so I think it's actually almost an insult to Mark Zuckerberg's intelligence here to ask him a question like that. When you get the captive, you get him for 3 hours and your decision is to ask him a question like, how does Facebook work? Like, really? Like it's anyway. It's very strange. It's a very strange. It's something that's been this lowest common denominator stuff, which again, it's why I'm sitting here going, well, I'm just going to stream for fun because it's fun because I like talking to a camera. I have no illusions about going anywhere with it. Because I know that the people that get paid the big bucks, the people that are successful, there are exceptions, but the people who pay the big bucks or get the big bucks are those who are willing to dumb shit down to the lowest common denominator, have sort of Oprah's book club fucking bullshit conversations, or lie to people or mislead people. It's not again, this comes down again to watch who doesn't get interviewed on these things. Okay? It's not experts. It's people who can say dumb things it's people who are willing to dumb shit down. And it's just like, okay, God, if the world was run by the experts on Joe Rogan, we'd be, well, increasingly is, that's the problem. But, it's just such an insult to everyone that he has to sit and explain this, like how Facebook fucking works, what you need to set up a Facebook group. Yeah, so basically how Facebook works is that you have a personal account, you're an admin for a page, you can have several admins. If you set up a page that grows quickly or sets off certain flags in the system, then they will look at that thing and go, okay, who owns it, who's this? Or if it's reported, there's a whole bunch of processes in place. That plus law enforcement, there's multiple different angles that this goes in. And it's just bizarre that people are so fucking stupid. It's not like... I just find it strange that the conversations that I was having, like, oh, the internet's kind of important in like early 2000s, is still like, you're still having to sell people on fucking basics. And it's like, it's not just political science, it's also tech. And that people think that because they use Facebook that they know how these things, it's like, no, you don't, shit. If you have to ask a question like that, then it's an insult. Anyway. But that's why I'd never be on Joe Rogan.
For certain political things, I think having a sense of what country they're originating from, I mean, some of that you can do just by looking at where their server traffic comes from, like is the IP address coming from Romania or,
An interesting point here. Mark Zuckerberg also clearly has America brain, because the one thing that that he didn't mention here is that of the I think there was a bunch of malicious accounts. I'll get the exact numbers up in a minute, but a large portion of the bot networks and fraud networks were coming out of the United States. But they do definitely use the the whole race, the sort of, anyway.
Yeah, because if it's like an ad in some other country's election, then you probably want to make sure that ad is especially in countries that have laws around that, are coming from someone who's a valid citizen or like
Yeah.
at least in that place. So there's a bunch of, I think, I don't know, one theme in my worldview around this stuff, and when it gets to some of the stuff that we talked about before, is like, I don't think that this stuff is black and white or that you're ever going to have like a perfect AI system. I think it's all trade-offs all the way down, right? And
It is.
And you could build a system, and you can either be overly aggressive and capture a higher
It
percent
is
of the bag.
trade-offs all the way down, and it's trade-offs all the way up as well. And I know that sounds like an odd thing to say, but when you think about what you are expected to do in order to get reach on social media, which is that lowest common denominator stuff that I was talking about, the voices that are promoted on the platform are as as significant as those that are demoted. And the problem is that there are like the thing is that one thing that we know about sort of the Daily Call, not Daily Caller, what's fucking fuckwits network? Oh, the Daily Wire. Is that they also happen to spend an awful lot of money on ads. And so there's lots of different conflicts in place. It's not just about organic content, it's about paid content, but also that the Daily Wire, and they astroturf large parts of their stuff. They get a lot of reach because they get a lot of funding. They get a lot of money. And you can't compete in that space when you're up against millions and billions of dollars and people with no scruples who are willing to lie and who also just bullshit everyone and make everything easily accessible. You sort of, I'm working on a thing about sort of, living in an information desert, much like a food desert. Okay. The content that's fast and free and easy is, it's funded. And it's, but the people who can't afford to pay for good quality stuff and good quality content, or, can't commission like research or anything like that, they're at the mercy of these networks like Fox News, who are well funded and able to provide you information that's free. And it's like, well, you get what you pay for. And it's kind of there's trade-offs all along the way. Okay. But in terms of content moderation, there's definitely trade-offs. One of the big trade-offs that I was thinking of before was, one of my big beefs with Facebook was when I've had a couple of friends die in the last few years, and I didn't know until like months later when I was like, I haven't heard from them in a while. Check. Oh shit. Okay. And I was just like, well, you'd think that like of all the things Facebook would prioritize in your feed, that would be it, which is a major event. Like they always told us to put the life events because that was the thing, and that's where I call bullshit on this stuff with Zuckerberg. But again, because I understand that things are complicated and also assume that certain decisions are made in good faith and for the right reasons, I can also understand why someone who has died, why you might want to not have that sort of go, have the family members or anything swamped with too many notifications or anything like that. So you kind of don't. So there's, you see there's always those things in conflict, constantly in conflict, different needs, different interests, different benefits and harms and costs, and some completely unforeseeable, some foreseeable. Okay. Then you've got business interests and capitalism and all those things that go into it. But, it's like it's anybody who's saying that any of this is simple in any way doesn't know what they're talking about. And anybody who isn't insulted on Mark Zuckerberg's behalf by these fucking questions, it's like, what are Facebook? I feel like I've gone back to fucking 2009. Oh, how do I use Facebook? Oh my God. At this point, you're just willfully stupid. At this point, you are just completely fucking willfully retarded. If you're going to interview the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies, do some fucking reading. Jesus Christ. Wish I had $100 million. Then I wouldn't have to do all this fucking reading.
Guys, but then also by accident take out some number of good guys. Or you could be a little more lenient and say, okay, no, the cost of taking out any number of good guys is too high, so we're going to tolerate having, just a little bit more, more bad guys on the system. These are values questions, right? Around what do you value more?
And he's correct. Lots of trade-offs there. And of course, people miss the point. Oh, who says the good guys are and who says the bad guys are? He goes, it's like, no, you're missing the point. Is that is subjective. His point is that it is subjective and that he's got lots of different actors in different areas, like including shareholders, including users, and he's trying to fight, keep all stakeholders happy, okay? The stakeholder management team at Facebook alone is huge, okay? The policy team, like the largest growing department.
And those are super tricky questions. And part of what I've struggled with around this is I didn't get into this to basically judge those things. I got into this to design technology that helps people connect, right? It's like, and like...
I'd like to point out, if we contrast, and my takeaway after watching this last week, and I said to Paul, I said, he stands in stark contrast to Elon Musk, right? In terms of, because one thing I've noticed about Mark Zuckerberg that Musk doesn't do is that Elon Musk thinks everyone else's achievements are his achievements. And he talks about how he thinks that he's like the world's savior. And that's a dangerous fucking thing, okay? Because he's not true. He's not clever about politics. He doesn't know, okay? And Mark Zuckerberg was great. I actually was very proud of him for saying what he said, because what you'll notice is that Zuckerberg is actually someone who talks about we. He talks about what he knows best. That's why he spent an hour talking about the tech and then fucking asshole clenched right up when he started to talk about this. This is not the stuff that he likes doing. He's stuck with it. And I imagine, and if there's a thin line between someone who has startup tech and someone who becomes a billionaire. It really is just, the tech's no different. It's just a number of different factors. Some of it is just right place, right time. Some of it is like the founder. Some of it is the tech. All those things. Again, lots of different factors. There's no one reason. Again, these fucking, these children who LARP as venture capitalists and think that they're just, it's not that simple. Okay, it's a lot of different factors that make a successful business, let alone a successful tech business. Okay, let alone one that scales like this. These are huge problems. Okay, and so I'm not critical. If I was to be choosing my billionaires, I would be more inclined to believe Mark Zuckerberg than I would with Elon Musk. And that is primarily because at least Mark Zuckerberg knows what his lane is, he knows what his area is, and he defers to his team. And that's one thing that I think people don't realize. Elon Musk is like, I can fix this. I've thought about this. I'm just going to solve all the world's problems sitting on the fucking toilet. It's like, well, maybe things are, and Joe Rogan is very similar, which is that he thinks that he just can think about it, blurt it out, and there be no fucking, that experts don't know things, or that there's people who don't dedicate their, even me, like there's people who, I'm fairly smart, but there's experts who dedicate their entire lives and entire vocation to one sliver of all of these areas, okay? I tend to be, I'm a bit more generalist, but, but user experience is my main jam, and that sort of overlaps with policy. Problem is, a lot of these things are intersecting now where they didn't before, so it's not as linear as I would have liked. But there are people now who they've dedicated their whole life to designing research projects for this stuff. So anyway, but I just wanted to point that out, that if you pay attention to Mark Zuckerberg in the right way, not the guy's weird, I don't like weirdos like that. If you pay attention, he's actually someone who is quite humble and quite, he knows where he ends and everyone else begins. Elon Musk, not so much.
I mean, you could probably tell when we spent the first hour talking about the metaverse and the future of basically building this whole technology roadmap.
Rebecca said Elon Musk still suffers from the stupidity that he does. Yes.
To basically give people this realistic sense of presence. It's like, that's what I'm here to do.
Apologies if I didn't engage with the chat early. I didn't mean to. I just didn't understand it, and I was just getting into the things.
So this whole thing that's like arbitrating what is okay and what is not, I obviously have to be involved in that, because this is at some level, I run the company, and I can't just abdicate that. But I also don't think that as a matter of governance, you want all of that decision making vested in one individual. So I think one of the things that our country and our government gets right is the separation of powers. So one of the things that I tried to create is we created this oversight.
I love it when people wander off lane. It's great. But the oversight board is a good development. I've covered that before.
Board. That basically we appointed people whose kind of paramount value is free expression, but they also balance that with things like when is there going to be real harm to others in terms of safety or privacy or other human rights issues, and basically that board, people in our community can appeal cases to when they think that we got it wrong, and that board actually gets to make the final binding decision, not us. So in a way, I actually think that is a more legitimate form of governance than having just a team internally that makes these decisions, or maybe some of them go up to me, although I don't spend a ton of my time on this on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's generally good to have some kind of separation of powers where you're architecting the governance so that way you have different stakeholders and different people who can make these decisions, and it's not just like one private company that's making decisions even about what just happens on our platform.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big news item that's controversial? Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story.
I'd like to point out before we get into this, because I will probably just start ranting about idiots, okay? This is a documented policy. It has been for years. And especially since 2016, they have been working their fucking tail off to create the policy documents. They're all there. It's all documented. It is frequently amended. But of course, God forbid someone who earns $100 million might actually have to fucking read. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we have
merit.
those two.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda.
He admitted it. They work with the FBI. Yeah, they work with law enforcement routinely. It's a cybersecurity risk. It's a known policy. He didn't admit anything. It's what they do. It's normal. Again, this is the difference between, this conspiratorial nonsense where they think that there's a conspiracy and just running shit. How do they think that things run? Honestly, these people are so fucking stupid. Anyway.
2016 election, we have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of
which there was.
That's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it. You could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased.
Oh my God, this is like the his laptop is the fucking her emails of 2021. It's the fucking hell, man. Anyway, but that's a perfectly reasonable thing, especially in light of it's actually a sign that they were on alert. It's just funny to see that it's like, we want bullshit. We want a bullshit. And if we are called on that bullshit, we're going to say that we're censored. That's the whole fucking MO of these right-wing fuckheads. They just got, again, it wasn't false, was it? No, I don't know, maybe if you didn't make it. So, okay, here we go. Maybe if you weren't such bullshitters, it's like this boy who cried wolf thing. Maybe if Murdoch Press weren't established haters of, Murdoch's war on Facebook wasn't established, okay? If he wasn't such a bad faith actor, maybe if the journalists and at Fox weren't such bad faith, maybe if, the US corporate media hadn't run such a shit show in the last election, maybe if you hadn't manipulated to win the last election, then maybe you might get a story out. Or maybe you just got a taste of your own fucking medicine. This is the thing. It's like, yeah, this is exactly what he was saying before about good guys and bad guys. It's like, well, okay, you're the bad guys. So they're going to assume the shit that comes from you is dodgy. And it is. And that, I mean, even the way that it was spun is, I don't give a shit about the fucking laptop. Why am I reading about that laptop? I don't care. I want to see no American news on my fucking Facebook. I don't give a fuck. I'm sick of it. Okay, but anyway, but it's just like, this was a perfectly reasonable thing. There was no grand collusion. It's just, hey, heads up, there's an election. As per our election interference policy, which we've had in place since 2016, since, we figured out that a bunch of fucking fuckwits can't play nice. We're going to make sure that everyone else has to suffer because those guys can't fucking play nice. Everyone else has to suffer. Sorry, that's going to be some false positives. Exactly what he was saying. You either want a platform that is unusable and terrible, and also, don't forget my last stream, where Facebook is liable for certain things, like the Myanmar massacre that occurred, all of these things that have actually resulted in imminent and major harm, and they've tried to fix it, and you're moaning about how they're going to fix it because of some pointless fucking argument. Who cares about the laptop? If it stops another massacre, then fucking calm down. Jesus, you morons.
It got shared. It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But I mean, basically a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper-political issue, so depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But
right.
But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country,
he's oh my God, he actually respects the law enforcement and the institutions. Wow.
Very professional law enforcement. They come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specifically, but it basically fit the pattern.
When something like that turns out to be real, is there regret for not having it evenly distributed and for throttling the distribution of that story?
What do you mean evenly distributed?
I mean evenly in that it's not suppressed. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's
all suppressed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it turned out after the fact. The fact checkers looked into it. No one was able to say it was false.
Okay, just a few stats here, which is that conservative content, fake news content, bullshit Fox News content, actually, when you look at all the data, actually gets a higher ranking in the algorithm because they've got such a sophisticated and a high budget, massive amount of ad spend. They boost every post. The amplification of things like the Daily Wire and all of those fucking networks, okay, is they outbid every I'm not going to put CNN aren't left wing media, but any fucking left wing media, okay. I put them all in the same fucking right wing camp, but all American media is conservative, right? But they outspend like 100,000 to 1. Of course, it's what? Oh, well, we can't game it and rig it exactly the way that we want. Therefore, it's censorship. No, they are constantly the top performing pages, the most engaged pages, fucking all this stuff. So don't buy this bullshit. Okay? They were on alert during an election that there was going to be a bunch of bullshit shared, okay, based on all of the data and information. Came from Murdoch Press, New York Post, Murdoch, okay, who hates Facebook, hates all this shit, okay. There's so many different factors here and so many different interests, not to be conspiratorial, I'm just saying, right? That's just the reality that we live in, that there's a lot of different forces at play here. And I would, if I was in his position, assume that something coming from the Murdoch press and the timing of that and the virality of it, that it, or again, hundreds of different signals. It's not just, that's conservative, lever. What the fuck do they think people are doing? They said it's just Tim Pool and his trolley experiment. That's what he thinks it is. He thinks it's a fucking trolley that Mark Zuckerberg is sitting there with a lever and like killing children. It's like, fuck off. No. By every indication and every signal that I could see, I thought it was probably bullshit. You've seen this stuff about TikTok and China and fucking China and Russia and all that stuff coming from Murdoch Press. It's the same shit. You can assume that most of what comes out of there, especially at election time, is bullshit. Okay? And I think they actually did act. They were in good faith more than I would have been, if I'm honest. And they're like, oh, but you like censorship. No, I don't. I hate fuckwits. Okay? I hate people who game the system and then there would be less censorship and less need for censorship if you weren't such bad actors and if you could actually be honest and you weren't astroturfing every fucking aspect of all of this every day. When it came to the pandemic, when it came to everything, if you weren't throwing all this money at it and being bad faith actors and dishonest actors and fucking throwing all this money and resources and fucking, brain fucked people 24/7 sharing this bullshit, okay? If you weren't doing that, we wouldn't need this. And the thing is that you turn around and go, oh, we're the victims. It's like, no, you are the perpetrators. These fucking GOP culture wars people, all these fucking right-wingers, and they use Joe, I don't know what the fuck his game is, okay? He's obviously just not clever, but it's just like, I don't know how to solve this problem because he can't turn around and say that. I can. Again, why I'm not invited onto things. But it's like, if you actually, are you aware that you are the bad guys? Are you aware that most of these policies exist because of you and your audience? Are you aware that the data shows time and time again that the Fox News network are the biggest and United States government and also US media by proxy, corporate media, okay? The fucking tentacles of the United States, corporate interests, okay? And Murdoch and, whatever, all those fucking people. Concentrated media ownership and all those sorts of things, okay? Not a conspiracy, just the data. They're the biggest purveyors of bullshit and moral panic. So if you didn't do that, you wouldn't be censored as much. Do you remember when the internet was fairly free? And do you know why it was? Because these fuckwits weren't on it. All of this stuff has been developed in response to these guys and in response to liars like Tim Pool. People like Tim Pool, people like Ben Shapiro, people who lie deliberately to their audiences and they throw fucking money after money after money, climate change deniers, fucking, all this stuff. Okay? They throw all this money at bullshit and then they turn around and act like they're the victims when they're the ones that are the main reason that these policies exist in the first place. And now I'm not saying that there's not valid criticisms of Facebook. Like I've talked about, most notably the Myanmar massacre, the Cambridge Analytica problem. But a lot of these problems with tech are that they are learning as they go. And a lot of this stuff is, some of it is foreseeable in the set. I've said this before myself, which is 2010. I was like, guys, it's just dealing with engineers, which is that they don't fucking think, they don't see the world the way that I see the world and we see the world. That's why engineers and designers and people have to work together. But the problem is that engineers and academics in particular tend to have this idea that because they're smart in one area that they know everything and that their hammer is a solution for everything is a nail and that they can engineer their way out of a problem. I was warning about these things, and just, pat it on the head. There, dear, It's like, well, you shouldn't be using data in this way. You should, because, if you're doing it, then that means that, dodgy political operators would be doing it too. And that this has, that there's room for manipulation, all that sort of stuff. I was warning this very, very early on. I was one of the first to really see it, right? hi, Alex. Hello, long time no chat. And Kamara Fresh, does Joe push on Zuck? Okay, so I'm going to answer that because I'll get there. So with Zuck, right? So this interview was actually, I'll just pause for a minute. This interview was really actually quite enlightening. Mostly because, and again, I'll admit my own bias here, which is that I might be too charitable, too forgiving, and sort of transplanting more of myself in Zuckerberg, or see, because both Paul and I, in tech, and Paul in particular, he's a software engineer, he's a weirdo, he's fucking, so my knee jerk when all the mean kids are sort of like, but he's weird and he looks like a robot. It's like, well, that's not really analysis, that's you being a bully. But at the same time, we often have that conversation because we've built tech products before that didn't quite land. I thought was about the tech, but it turns out it's just because, it's about, a lot of it is about the makeup of the founder and whether they can be used in this way and, various other things. I tend to quit when things are unethical. It's a thing. But I don't think, the thing is that it's not a 1-0 thing. As in, because I think you just said the tech people know what they're doing, older officials don't. Well, which is, I think that, no, because I tend to not hold the technocratic view either. I think that when you've got multidisciplinary problems, you need multidisciplinary solutions. You need people to start, this is something that is, there is no one person. So this is the problem with Elon Musk, is that Elon Musk thinks Elon Musk's fucking shit doesn't stink and that Elon Musk is the fucking savior of mankind. It's almost like there's people around Elon Musk who actually, it's just like, well, no, it requires vast resources, teams of people, a lot of complexity, even like every model that you could come up with for any kind of potential consequences, which is what Facebook would have. This is the thing I think that people don't understand with, and I talked about this in the previous stream a bit about risk, and that, people think, oh, it's not just a gut feel thing. They don't just sit there and go, well, this sounds risky. They actually have modeling and they have models and they have, a lot of it is by numbers, but some of it is, instinct, but a lot of it is, models but these things are developing as we go. We're kind of building a parachute on the way down. And it's like, it's one of those, not to use cliches like that, but, it's not an easy ask. And I think that one thing I know for sure is that you are correct that officials, like the Congress, that hearing with Mark Zuckerberg, it was just an embarrassment, absolute embarrassment, the kind of questions that he was being asked. But no one... The thing is, I think Mark Zuckerberg answers to the best of his ability on behalf of the 75,000 plus employees at Facebook, 35,000 of which are involved in content moderation alone. It is a global organization. There's different laws, different policies. They're dealing not only with users, but different, the scale. When you actually think about the scale of this stuff, you're probably a little bit more sympathetic. I can't even comprehend because it's very difficult to manage, okay? And I think anybody who is saying sort of absolute one way or the other is not, and I think like Joe gets to that point where he empathizes with, I wouldn't want that job. I said to Paul, I was like, I don't think he's paid enough for this job. I really don't. Like, I wouldn't do it. But he is a human being. But he's also an engineer, but he is also someone who tends to know his limits, and I respect that, okay? And I actually do have more respect for Mark Zuckerberg than I do most of the others, believe it or not. And I know he's unfortunately, because he's had to be kind of taking the stand a little bit, he's not going to keep anyone happy. But he's also, don't forget, it's not just Democrats and Republicans at him or the US versus everybody else against him. It's also users. Remember, there's lots of different cleavages in terms of interest there, which is conflicts, right? It's the users' interests versus that of the business model, okay? So you've got privacy, data, all that sort of stuff against that. They've learned that the hard way. They've had to build that fucking parachute on the way down. Again, they still are. They're trying to undo a lot of it is trying to undo a lot of stuff that, again, bad faith actors. Like, again, I've talked about this before, which is that people who start tech companies, especially, social, especially new tech and innovators, unless you were around for it, you probably don't understand how utopian a lot of this stuff is and how idealistic people in tech are. It's one of the things that made me love tech so much and love digital, and why I went out of politics into sort of user experience and sort of changing hearts and minds online more than sort of offline, was because I saw what the potential was. But the problem with that, the very thing, there's a part if you're trying to create $1 billion piece of technology, right, that gets, the unicorn, if you're trying to get to unicorn status, okay, which is $1 billion valuation in the industry, there's an element of blind naivety and stupidity and not seeing, and blind spots for negativity or negative self-talk or anything like that. There's no real room for that, which is why you always need the sort of that. It's a delicate balance, okay? And that's what I'm saying, is that the very nature of being an entrepreneur, particularly a tech one and particularly a successful one, has a blind spot for what can go wrong. Because if you think about what can go wrong, you talk yourself out of it. Like, that's my biggest thing, is that I tend to talk myself out of ideas. I think of them before everyone else, or I think of things before everyone else, or I write stuff down, but then I never finish it because I talk myself out of it and go, well, what's the point? No one's listening, fucking whatever. I'm doing that now as well. And so I have a tendency to sort of talk myself out of things. There's something else that you need to blindly believe in yourself in order to get there, right? But there's no real, it's not really, okay, so I think they kind of bank on it being overwhelming. Well, I don't think it's that simple. I think it just is. It's just complex. Some things are just, and there's a difference between, there's a difference between things being complicated and things being complex, okay? And I think people get confused between those two concepts, okay? That's why I think with this interview, if you watch the bigger interview, not just the clip, he talks about how he breaks things down into sort of small solvable problems, okay? And I think that that's the best way, is to just focus on the problem at hand. That's a big part of like the research with the psych research around harms, and I think to make a blanket statement, and again, go back and watch previous stuff about the TikTok like stuff, and is that a lot of this stuff is not known, and just because it instinctively feels true, there's people that are exploiting that moral panic. There's people that are that because they're personally got a problem, use social media in a certain way, things just take hold and go, well, it's addictive. Never listen to anyone who says something's addicting, by the way. Means they're an idiot. They don't know anything about addiction, because it's addictive, not addicting. Pro tip. Yeah. Oh no, it's yeah, but okay. So the difference between, again, okay, would you give the same credence to McDonald's? See, it's not actually an entirely out there analogy, because, again, if you're analysing it within how capitalism functions, then, yeah, they're the same thing. Like, I love that the movie The Founder, the one with Michael Keating, and how he Michael Keaton, sorry. I think that what happens is that capitalism puts pressure on you to do things fast and quickly, and he had a grand vision for how to run a restaurant, but he got fucked over by the money. He got fucked over by interests that were bigger than him, and could destroy him. I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily it's quite an apt thing to compare to, but it's actually just more because the thing people don't realize is that even though Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, Amazon, they're all different issues. Okay, so first of all, Facebook, for the most part, isn't in the enterprise hosting space, okay? They do like Facebook at work and that sort of stuff, but they're a lot more sort of consumer-based and sort of advertising model, sort of, social networks, that sort of stuff, okay? Whereas you've got, so Microsoft, who owns LinkedIn, Twitter's the same. Twitter's not a hosting company. They're kind of related, but they're not. But whatever. Twitter and Facebook are kind of traditional social networks, whereas Amazon and Google are more sort of, they own the data centers and they own all of this sort of infrastructure that goes into, that's a sort of bigger problem. But they've got sort of, but even within the companies themselves, like you've got like, they're all siloed. They've got different parts, they've got 75,000 employees at Facebook. I think they've got nearly 8,000 at Twitter, which I disagree with. I think there's 3 people that work at Twitter, and they're in 3 koalas in a trench coat. They run Twitter. LinkedIn, who are actually pretty good in terms of their staff because they, but you've got, anyway, it's diverse. But the thing is that the problem is more the model, the business model, and the root cause is really just that sort of, they're owned by hedge funds, and hedge funds have interests that are anti-human, anti-user, anti-government, all of those sorts of things. So it's more of a, that's a big one to unpack. I can't really engage with that because I want to move on with the clip and go to my main point. But the answer is just, if you're doing just a critique of how capitalism operates and functions, then Facebook is no different to any other, multinational corporation. Because the hedge funds don't make anything or produce anything. They're the ones, and they're also the people that gave him all of that money early on. I don't think people understand how bought and sold tech person is, that the second you sign on the dotted line for that large amount of money, or you go for your IPO, how you are now owned by those people. The other hedge funds don't produce anything. Zuck makes things. He likes making things. That interview makes it very clear that he just likes to make things. The capital did make a better product. It can or it can't. That's a sort of a derailing conversation. Anyway, so I'll move on.
It had this period where it was getting less distribution. So yeah, I mean, but I think like, I think it sucks though. I think in the same way that probably having to go through like a criminal trial, but being proven innocent in the end sucks. Like it still sucks to have like that you had to go through a criminal trial, but at the end you're free. So it's, I don't know if the answer would have been don't do anything or don't have any process. I think the process was pretty reasonable. We still let people share it, but obviously you don't want situations like that.
But it's certainly much more reasonable than Twitter's stance, and it's probably also the case of armchair quarterbacking, right? Or at least Monday morning quarterbacking, I should say, because in the moment you have...
But also the fact that this was always going to be something. It's very important to pay attention to who's complaining about the issue. Like I tend to be someone who focuses more on the the argument at hand or the issue at hand, but there's a pattern to who's complaining about stuff. If it's up in the fucking Ben Shapiro, all of those MAGA fuckheads, and Fox News and all those sort of, cage rattlers that exist in the culture wars. If it's in that ecosystem, right, there's a very good chance that it's bullshit. Anyway.
Had reason to believe, based on the FBI talking to you, that it wasn't real and that there was going to be some propaganda. So what do you do?
Yeah.
And then if you just let it get out,
I don't know,
there,
it's been documented.
And changes the election and it turns out to be bullshit, that's a real problem.
This is the thing. It's like, what do you do? And it annoys me because it's like, well, they said what they were going to do. They're committed to doing it. Imagine being the policy people at fucking Facebook, where it's like, I've spent the last 6-7 years of my life dedicated to this shit. This is what we did. This is what we plan to do. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're doing. This is how we're executing it. Here it is, written down. Here's a report on what we did and why we did it. And then you go on there and you're like, so what do you do?
Imagine that those kind of decisions are the most difficult. The decisions of like what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Yeah. I mean, what would you do in that situation?
I don't know what I would do. I would have to like really thoroughly. Well, first of all, you're dealing with the New York Post, which is one of the oldest newspapers in the country.
Murdoch owned New York Post. notoriously known for being at war with Facebook on any given day, also at war with facts. Okay, if it's got Murdoch attached to it, you can assume that it's either a spun version of the truth or bullshit. Okay, they might be the oldest paper but they're again the fact that they leave out. I mean, obviously, Zuck threw some shade at Murdoch like earlier on in the interview, but the fact that Rupert Murdoch owns this shit is significant.
So I would say I would want to talk to someone from the New York Post, and I would say, how did you come up with this data? Like, where are you getting the information from? How do you know whether or not this is correct? And then you have to make a decision, because
that's
they
what
might
the fact checkers do.
It's very it's hard, because everybody wants to look at it after the fact. Now that we know that the laptop was real and then it was a legitimate story, and there is potential corruption involved with him, what we think, oh, that should not have been restricted, that should not have been banned from sharing on Twitter. Right. I think everybody agrees with that. Even Twitter agrees with that. But the thing is, then they didn't think that. In the beginning, they thought it was fake. So what do? Like, if something comes along and the Republicans
again, I'd like to point out that Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, they all have documented policies on this stuff, documented procedures, contacts, all of these things. They had press releases, they have engaged, they have the constant engagement, constant stakeholder engagement. They are constantly working on this stuff. But what do you do? What would I do? Yep, okay.
Make it
Let's dumb it
look
down.
like Joe Biden's a terrible person, and they only do it so that they can win the election, but it's really just propaganda. What are you supposed to do with that? You're supposed to not allow that to be distributed. So if they think that's the case, it makes sense to me that they would try to stop it. But I just don't think that they looked at it hard enough. When the New York Post is talking about it, they're pretty smart about what they release and what they don't release. If they're going over some data from a laptop and you could talk to a person, but again, like, this is just one story, like one individual story. Like, how many of these pop up every day?
Sorry, I will just engage that one because the thing about I open with this, which is that most people don't actually have they don't have knowledge on this area. They don't have good knowledge in this area. Most of the tech people don't understand the political, and most of the political people don't understand the tech. And this is where these gaps are. Unfortunately, because I live in a land of Dunning-Kruger in both areas, and I happen to know both very well, I find myself frustrated on all sides with this. And I also said a lot of it is actually just, like at the beginning of the stream, I actually talked about how when you see your own area of expertise, like, sort of go through this culture war reaction thing, you start to see who just falls into line with talking points and who actually reads anything. Like, not a single person that I watch actually read, like they just were like, okay, so there were three main takes, which is basically, they took this one clip and, like, all the fucking dickheads on the right wing side of things. Again, not a monolith, but, the usual suspects fed the out of context video. He admitted to suppressing the story and colluding with the FBI. Bullshit, not true. That's just it's normal policy, procedure, process stuff. And it's not even their it's not even their preference. They're just forced to do this stuff. Previous stream talks about that, right? Reliability and risk and, all that sort of stuff. The other take was, he admitted it, but I don't like him because he's weird. Okay. And also then they start talking about something else. Like, I do like Hassan Piker, actually, believe it or not. He tends to have, he makes me laugh. Not everyone, obviously, people can't know everything. I just, it's just interesting to see who is not engaged in these things and who is elevated as an expert when they're not. I've talked about this with this sort of leaving the left nonsense, that it's like, well, if you are in any meaningful way involved in the political left on a day-to-day basis, then you know that that's a very big tent and a very broad church, and that you don't just go, well, it's not. I don't understand this whole leaving the left nonsense when you go, well, you obviously haven't been to a meeting ever in your life if you just leave the left. It's like, what are you talking about? Are you leaving a Facebook group? Okay, then whatever. Okay, who cares? So I'm leaving them in my mind. He actually makes me laugh a lot, and he's I find him I like what he's doing as well, which is just, you know, he I like it. He pushes back, which is, I really like the way he pushes back too. But again, I have a higher pain threshold. Like I can listen to people I disagree with on certain things, and but I really like what he's doing for young boys on, you know, because, you know, I mean, Vaush I find him to be a bit of a fucking fuckstickle, but at the same time, I like that they're filling a void that, you know, that was, you know, before recently filled by sort of the, like, you know, the right wingers and stuff. I don't really watch Destiny. I mostly just a time thing. I'm a big fan of R.M. Brown. It cracks me up. But yeah, I try not to take in too much shit, because it's just, you know, everyone has, so the thing about good takes, bad takes, everyone has something to offer. Again, I think it's just more about being selective about who you are appointing as an expert in a certain area. And one area as an expert that I'm pointing out is a glaring gap for most of these guys, is that they don't know what they're talking about. They don't actually, you know, they may have an understanding of it from the sort of the using it side or the influencer side or even the sort of marketing side. But in terms of the building of product and like the various stakeholders from the corporate side, they probably don't necessarily understand why certain decisions are made. And a lot of it is about liability. A lot of it is like defamation. And a lot of it is in response to things that have happened in the past that they fucking did. Okay, so like the Cambridge Analytica thing, you know, Facebook's policies and overreach on sort of censoring, well, not censoring, but, you know, like whatever they did with the, you know, limiting reach before the fact checkers came through, that is in direct response to things like the Cambridge Analytica affair and all of those things that were exploited by Trump. So they can't exactly complain, you know, that those rules exist because they did it. Yeah, there's lots of good books, but there's one that I'll mention once I get through this clip too. But anyway, so
polarizing issues like climate change or COVID or you know, foreign policy or Ukraine. Anytime there's like a really controversial issue where some people think that it's imperative that you take a very specific stance and you can't have the other stance, like those moments on social media, those trouble a lot of people because they don't know why certain things get censored or certain things get promoted.
Yeah.
But I'd like to say, not knowing, and this is one of those things I've ranted about at the beginning as well, there are things where not knowing isn't an excuse, okay? Because I've said this before about there's certain things like, you know, dudes who act like they don't know what mansplaining is. When it's been talked, there comes a point where things have been talked about so often, defined, clearly defined, you know what they are, and if you don't know what it is, you're either very intellectually lazy or you know, being deceptive, okay? And that's one of those things like with this culture war stuff, which is like in 2016, 2017, when the wheels sort of fall off and, you know, people like Jordan Peterson or James Lindsay and those people, where you engage with them in good faith, like 2017 is vastly different to 2022 when they have shown you who they support, they've shown you where they get their money from, they've shown you through their conduct who you know, we know certain things. We know certain things that we didn't know 5 years ago. And Facebook are very similar in that way. It's like, well, they know certain things that they didn't know 5 years ago. And they knew, you know, like there's things that we just don't know yet. That's the nature of like technology and dealing with so many humans at scale. And, you know, not only that, but multiple languages. cultures, subcultures within those multiple languages, within cultures, all those certain things, right? And I think that a lot of it is undoing a lot of that stuff. And I've seen like so many people that were just radical feminists, but they're now full on right wingers talking shit. And it's like, again, you can see where the incentive is. Because if you sit there and you pay attention, there's patterns, okay? And that's not being conspiratorial. It's saying, okay, well, that person's going through a vulnerable time. That person, has a certain look or a certain story that will elevate that. And if you're not immune to that, like the fact that you can be sort of, nudged in certain directions, both by an audience and, by the content that you consume, then, you're kind of toast. But you can't go in 2022 again, and it's also like, the benefit of there's that hindsight bias stuff, okay, which is that we 2016, it shook a lot of stuff. And a lot of it came from the GOP. A lot of it came from the IDW. A lot of it came from Rogan, okay? And like watching Rogan sort of not learn from this and in many instances double down, right? Yeah, and it's just, people, unless people are honest with themselves and are able to like be clear-headed, which most people aren't. I wouldn't even say that I am. Like, I fucked up. I'm documented as fucking up, falling into the sort of that turf stuff early, and then kind of going, okay, this seems like it's been weaponized, this whole issue. And then I went, nah, I'm out. I'm not helping them. No. I thought this was a good faith policy conversation in the left, and I thought we would resolve it. As soon as those fuckers took over, I was out. That's someone with principles, right? But it's the same thing with, like the pandemic and fear. Like, again, when people are afraid, they tend to go more into conspiracy theories, okay? Because it's conspiracy theories and conspiracism, is something where you create a narrative to sort of build control when there is no control. So when you're in a fearful state, it's understandable that people are going to be going into conspiracies more, sort of, I mean, we're not even really post-pandemic, but, this far in. But yeah, and, the pandemic broke Rogan. The Comedy Store being closed was an essential service for him. Yeah. But yeah, it's, but we all have our blind spots too. Like, and I'm not going to psychoanalyze, but this is just fun speculation. But I think there's an element of when you get that kind of wealth and that kind of pressure, because he was under a lot of pressure. But I think there's also his fear response around, which is that there's certain things you just can't buy your way out of. Like, this sort of stuff, right? Yeah. And that, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, it's, I also find it very interesting that I want to know why he was considered so useful by the big money, but yeah, it's obviously market value in this stuff. But yeah, there's lots of different reasons. I think it's just numbers alone. But a lot of people just paint by numbers. A lot of people just run shit by the numbers. And that's, again, something where the people who are running things only by numbers need the people who don't care about the numbers and care about principles. And, engineers need designers and designers need engineers. There's a balance there, okay, that needs to occur. And that's why there's no one person that has any answer to any of these problems. And we're doing the best we can. We're just doing the best we can. That's all we can do. So, and I just do the best I can and go, you know what, like I'm going to be charitable to Mark Zuckerberg. I've always defended him. I like him. I always have. I don't think that he could do any worse or any better in the circumstances. And, he seems to have surrounded him. Very different view of Sheryl Sandberg, but, he tends to surround himself with some very capable and very smart people. Okay. I'd love to work at Facebook. I'm not good enough to work at Facebook, so I assume they're smarter than me. Not that I've tried.
I agree.
And it's like to be in your spot. And one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is this, because like to be in your spot must be insanely difficult to have, no matter what decision you make, you're going to have a giant chunk of people that are upset at you. And there might be a right way to handle it.
But it's not even a giant chunk of people upset at you. It's also like actual liars, bullshitters, powerful people who are constantly trying to manipulate the system. And this is where I'll talk about network propaganda. It's a really important book. I bring it up a lot. And I think that it's an audio book. Okay. So you can just get a free trial or whatever, but it's actually also freely available if you want to read it. And it's just until you understand how asymmetric the disproportionate the influence of the GOP over like the media ecosystem, especially the online ecosystem, is like the Steve Bannon, that whole flood it with shit strategy, which is basically just flood everything with shit so nobody knows what is true. And that has been their whole MO for the last few years. And that's why everyone's confused. So, a big part of my job is to try and go, you know what, this is happening. I don't see how there's any way to sort of monetize telling the truth, and that's okay. So I'm just here to tell you and see how we go. It's like, whatever. I think we all have blind spots, but yeah, anyway, a lot of the left-wing analysis of this is, I just don't like Zuckerberg because he just looks weird. It's like, well, thanks, mate. Next time you want to talk about people who are being ableist, let's talk about that. Fuckhead. I work with engineers. I love them.
Well, I think the right way is to establish principles for governance that try to be balanced and not have the decision-making too centralized. Because I think that it's hard for people to...
See, and that is actually a good point about centralization, because don't be fooled. If Ben Shapiro... There we go. So Kamara Fresh said, thank God Ben Shapiro, one of those people, aren't running Facebook. And they're 100% correct. If Ben Shapiro ran Facebook, it would not be open. Trust me.
Accept that like some team at Meta or that I personally am making all these decisions. And I think people should be skeptical about so much concentration around that. So that's why a lot of the innovation that I've tried to push for in governance is around things like establishing this oversight board. So that way you have people who are luminaries around expression from all over the world, but also in the U.S. Folks like Michael McConnell, who's a Stanford professor, who's like he was.
I always leave out how American dominated it is, though. It's always a concern, but America brain.
Which Republican president appointed him? But he was, I think, going to be considered for the Supreme Court at some point. He's a very, very prominent and kind of celebrated free expression advocate, and he helped me set the thing up. And I think like setting up forms of governance around that are independent of us, that basically get the final say on a bunch of these decisions. And that's a step in the right direction. In the Hunter Biden case that you talked about before, I don't want our company to decide what's misinformation and what's not. So when we work with third parties and basically let different organizations do that. Now, then you have the question of, are those organizations biased or not? And that's a very difficult question. But at least we're not the ones who are basically sitting here deciding. We're not the ministry of truth for the world that's deciding whether everything is true or not. So I'd say this is not a solved problem. Controversies aren't going away. I think that it is interesting that the U.S. Is actually more polarized than most other countries. So I think sitting in the U.S., it's easy to extrapolate and say, hey, it probably feels this way around the whole world. And from the social science research that I've seen, that's not actually the case. There's a bunch of countries where social media is just as prominent, but polarization is either flat or has declined slightly. So there's something kind of different happening in the U.S. But
gee, what would that be?
But for better or worse, it does seem like the next several years do seem like they're set up to be quite polarized. So I tend to agree with you. There are going to be a bunch of different decisions like this that come up because of the scale of what we do. Almost every major world event has some angle that's like the Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp angle about how the services are used in it. So Yeah, I think just establishing as much as possible independent governance.
All right. Give me one sec. Yeah. So, what do you do? He admitted it. He admitted it. That guy's just weird. I thought that was a perfectly reasonable thing to say. And also, fucking get fucked. Sorry, it repeated. Okay. It might not. There we go. Should be okay now. Oh, thank you. That's very nice. So I just it's he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't, right? And I found the reaction very weird because there was nothing there that was like he admitted to colluding or anything other than just normal shit that's like basically policy. And it just goes to show who does and does not read. There's one guy that I watch because I have to, but not because I have to, but just because I like to stay. But I find him to be such a mean person, and it's that Surfs TV guy. He is so mean, and he's just so bad faith, and he's just sitting there like, basically like, oh yeah, but you know, all of these talking points about Zuckerberg that are just uncritically shared, like, oh yeah, the Facebook whistleblower, yeah, the Facebook whistleblower was paid by various, anyway, whatever. We all have our criticisms of Facebook, but for some reason he was just roasting him and saying, you look like a weird robot, you're a weirdo. It's like, what about all the like people in your audience who like are socially awkward and like you're not a very nice person. You're a terrible person. But then in the next breath they'll be like punching down on someone for being ableist, and it's just like, you fucking hypocrite. And it's the same thing with like the right wings. It's like the reason why these policies exist is because of them, is because they spread the bullshit. Okay, they are the largest disseminators of bullshit. Now, let me do this screen share now. So, Facebook, Meta, Transparency Center. It's been here for years. Okay, at Meta, they've, again, some of it's corporate speak and stuff, but it's an ongoing process. It's never fixed, right? And that's one of my beefs with this whole thing around Zuckerberg. It's like, yeah, you can criticize his actions all you want, but unless you're being charitable and first of all acknowledging the difficulty of his job and position that he finds himself in, okay? No one is all good or all evil or anything like that, okay? But also, I mean, engineer guy is an engineer and probably highly likely to be on the spectrum, and you see the way that when that first half of the interview where he was talking about shit that he loves, how he animated and he was excited and human and lovely and, but this stuff obviously wears him down. And if you work with anybody or know anybody on the spectrum, you know that this stuff, is immensely stressful for him. And so it was like to see that human side. But no, of course, the mean girls, like who just go for some reason think that because he's wealthy that they can, that their little, their little game of like picking on the weird kid isn't plain as day. And that these are people that have never made anything in their lives, by the way. They've never built anything other than sat in their for some reason they found a way. I don't know how they've done it. I think it's just the sheer numbers in America where you network with the right people. They're all just, I think, honestly, they're all just Ivy League fucking failed journo fucks who set up a YouTube channel, got lucky, and, they've never built anything other than a fucking, and again, I'm not saying it's not difficult to build a community or online, but to do that, there is a certain skill set required, and that is, not conducive to deep knowledge or deep learning or anything like that. Just me trying to stream, I have to be 2 weeks late on reacting to this thing because, I also work for a living and I know what's involved. And because I try to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. I do the reading, I do all of the background stuff. So, but these guys, if they're reacting on the same day, chances are they don't have deep knowledge on it. Okay. So it's an ongoing thing. Okay. Now, again, I'm not saying that there's not fucking problems. No one's denying the problem. But again, it's like, you're defending, but here's here's one example of where they fucked up. Yeah, there's going to be one example where they fucked up because it's complicated. It's complex. Okay, it's not complicated. It's complex. Okay. But yeah, look, hang on. Where are we? So, enforcement. 3-part approach to content enforcement. Okay, so look at this. So, restricting accounts by public figures during civil unrest. So look, they've got all of these policies here. They've been around for years and years and years. I'm not going to go through them. But, you know, it's like, here we go. So here's the data. Okay. You want to get a sense of the scale. Get some, you know, again, I'm not your Google. Maybe look at it. Maybe be curious. Okay. I'm not going to do what Tim Pool does and read like an article from nowhere by nobody about a non-story and claim that it's the news. I will say, here's the reports. Have a look if you're interested. Okay. I'm not your newsreader. Okay, so community standards enforcement report. Look. Where are we? So they, you know, I don't know how much easier they can make it for people. Oh, but what do you do? What is it that you do? How can we solve this problem? How can we possibly solve, I don't know, read what they're doing to solve the problem. I don't know what to tell you. It's like, even then I'm like, okay. Oh yeah, but you know all about it. But yeah, okay. But it's the same thing with all these people that are claiming to be like, I actually got my Instagram account banned, like my first Instagram account banned. And I didn't claim that, it wasn't a problem. It was a misunderstanding by AI. And you go, oh yeah, okay, I understand that. And you move on. Like, I don't understand why people think that it's just, get the tinfoil off your fucking head and read some stuff. Okay. I know it's the easier way to just react and be reactive and, you know, pretend that what feels true is true, because then you don't actually have to do anything and you don't have to be uncomfortable and you don't have to think and you don't actually have to feel like maybe you don't know stuff. And a lot of people don't know stuff about this particularly, especially, and also political theory. Unfortunately, I sit in the two areas where most people think they know the most, but they actually know the least. Okay. Anyway, so community standards. Oversight, where are we? Not oversight board, where are we? Where's the law enforcement? Our approach to elections. Here, documented. Repeatedly. Preventing interference. We stop millions of fake accounts every day before they are even created. Our security teams investigate and take down coordinated networks of accounts, pages and groups that try to manipulate public debate. We partner with governments, law enforcement agencies, charities, civil rights groups, and other tech companies to stop emerging threats. FBI, guess what they are? Law enforcement. Fighting misinformation. Now, I've been talked about misinformation, disinformation, the sleight of hand that occurs there. But that's something to pay attention to. Again, read some stuff. We work with more than 80 partners across 60 languages to fact check what people post and provide context on misleading content. We remove content that attempts to interfere with voting, such as incorrect voting information, and we remove calls for electoral violence, understandably. We reduce the distribution of false news about elections so fewer people see it. Okay. We require all political advertisers to verify their identity through an authorization process before they can buy ads, which is true. I've shown you the so we add paid for by disclaimers to political and issue ads and provide the owner and locations for political pages and groups. Also, you've got the Facebook ads library where you can go in and search it. I've gone through the Cats Against Trump and all those other things, and we've done those searches. It's there. It's available. You can go and look anytime you want. You won't, but you can. Okay. The information is there. They provide an ads library, searchable database of all political and issue ads from the last 7 years. So that you can see exactly what candidates are saying, who they're targeting, and who paid for it. Now, the way they get around that, obviously, is to sell non-political stuff and put people into an email list. Like, for example, one of the strategies that I've talked about is where they'll sell merch, and then they'll advertise sort of T-shirts or socks or something like that, and then funnel you off-site onto an email list where they can then retarget you with other stuff and nudge you off off platform. There's only so much they can do off platform, but that's why they need to coordinate, because part of it is actually they need to be able to anticipate a lot of this stuff. They need to be able to coordinate, as in looking for signals and stuff. Like a lot of that stuff from the FBI would have been a broadcast to social platforms about intelligence that they have. And, like I've got a lot of criticisms of certain institutions, but, this ain't it. This ain't it. Because it's the people who are manipulating the platform that are the ones that are screaming loudly about this. And the law exists primarily for them and to prevent them from spreading more shit than they already do. And they constantly do stuff under the radar. And one of the biggest things that they, is, to take you off platform. It's to try and get you to, fill out like benign quizzes or whatever, and then send you emails and then nudge you in the direction that they want. Like they can do that using not using political ads necessarily. There's always ways around it, and they're constantly having to do whack-a-mole around this. And so that's why, that's why they rely on these coordinations. But also, Twitter might have intel about organised botnets that are also planning Facebook and vice versa. This is all cybersecurity measures. It's got nothing to do with fucking censorship. And to make it about censorship is to completely just mislead people, misrepresent the issue. And also, one thing, I love it, it's people like, how do you tell if a post is it's like, well, it's algorithmic. And also, honestly, in most cases, those false positives, you can see exactly why they got banned and why the AI mistook it for abuse, and maybe don't abuse people. I don't understand. People don't understand how sophisticated this detection stuff is. That the natural language processing can detect sentiment, it can detect your intent, it can detect a lot of subtext from what you write. There's going to be false positives, yes. Okay, but I've never had a problem because I don't bully people, and I've never had a problem because I conduct myself in a certain way, and I know the rules. Okay, to sit around and you just don't have the right to say what you harass people. I don't know what to tell you. And yes, we can have a question about what's defined as harassment and what's what's truth or not, and what But at the same time, it becomes down to liability, and If you're a good faith actor, you understand why these rules are in place. If you're a bad faith actor, you'll be moaning that they're in place, mostly because you're probably one of the people that are trying to or either get away with bullying people or whatever. The rules are pretty flexible on Facebook. Okay, pretty flexible for the most part. As platforms go, Facebook's actually pretty decent. Twitter's a different story. Okay. Twitter is where psychopathic fucking high school bullies go to hang out. That's a platform for psychopaths. But again, Facebook are doing the best they can. So in this area, and you can't, unless you're willing to suddenly, change the business model and change who funds it, it's not going to, there's not much we can do about it. I prefer to look at how things are rather than how things should be. It's one of the biggest problems with the left, which I have a problem with anyway. But the left in the traditional sense is this idea of like perfection being enemy of the good at all times. It's like, if it's not my perfect way, I'm just going to burn it all to the ground and go and join the right wingers because they agree with me on this one thing. So fuck it. It's not my favorite way. Oh my God, I disagree on this one thing, so they're my friends now. Well, what the fuck is wrong with you? You think you're pro-women and you're voting right-wing because you think that the word woman, it's like, get your head straight. Get your head straight, you fucking morons. Anyway, but that's a side point. I always end up digressing into a rant about that shit. But dumbass people, you're not even rad femmes, you just fucking whatever. You just hate people. So anyway, I didn't really have much of a take on. Oh, yeah. So network propaganda. So the book. This is a book I recommend. I'm fading because I'm tired. Yeah, Ethan Klein's another one. Yeah, I quite like him too. He actually, it was funny. I watched Tim Dillon and him the other day. And I like Tim Dillon. Again, he's a comedian. Tim's all right. And I find Tim Dillon funny. But they were grilling him on the Andrew Tate thing. And it is actually interesting because it is it's interesting to see what people are consuming, because people's opinions often tend to just fall in line. You can tell if you're paying attention to all sort of aspects of a certain issue, you can tell what people are watching a lot of the time based on what they're saying. Like, to make the Andrew Tate thing about speech it shows that he's consuming way too much right-wing content and not enough of the sort of stuff that's focused a lot on the MLM stuff. You know, like, he was actually running scams. He was running again, people are never banned for one reason. They get several warnings. They get several opportunities to correct their behavior. It's usually a multitude of reasons, lots and lots of different reasons. There's never one reason. And if someone's reducing stuff down to like one issue, like speech, it's like, well, no, because they have generally balanced it with these things. Like the Trump thing was incredibly complicated. And that was complicated and complex. They are different things, but it was both, because that one was very much, there was a no winning moves situation there. And again, it's like one of those, would I don't know. Like, my knee jerk was, I'm not comfortable with tech companies being able to shut off the president of the United States. But at the same time, the president of the United States shouldn't be guaranteed a platform that is commercial in nature, not that's what, like I said, that's what BBC, that's what publicly funded broadcasters were for. It's like, well, it shouldn't be assumed that a corporation is going to provide you with a platform either. You know what I mean? So it's like there's different aspects to this issue, and it depends on what hat you have on and what outcome you want. And it's not necessarily just a matter of someone calling up Mark Zuckerberg and them all deciding they all just had an evil meeting. And it's like, how simplistic is your worldview that you think that that's how the world operates? So if you ever tried to get anything launched product-wise or policy-wise or anything in a corporation, you know how hard it is, okay? And again, I'm a critic of Facebook and the way that they conduct themselves sort of, in the lobbying space. But that's, you've got to critique that, you can't, you've got to be precise in your critique, because there is no such thing as sort of, it's like, well, okay, on this thing there's an issue, on this thing there's not. On this thing there is an issue and a problem that is Facebook's responsibility. In this one it's not. It's government responsibility. If I had to choose between Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook determining speech and the United States government determining my speech, I know which one I would choose. I would choose fucking Facebook. Okay, but also with Facebook, we kind of know what the deal is. Okay, if you don't know that the deal is that you get to use this platform for free and it makes people money, people build platforms on it, they make money on those platforms, they build an audience, people have had unprecedented access. Okay, I think that's another thing, is this, again, it's not a uniquely American thing, but it's definitely an American, like something that's more prominent in American mindset is this sense of entitlement, which is that they have been gifted the most amazing gift in our lifetime to have a platform, and they just assume that it's their right and that they can ruin it for everybody else. And I think that's something that you go, well, that's not your right. You don't have the right to a platform. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to do any, well, that's not true. I would have gone into media, but I'm saying it's simplistic, but most people would not have been able to get their message out in any meaningful way. Whereas, the internet gave me access to a world that I didn't have access to in Australia, and I still do. And, well, I don't trust the US government for speech. I just don't. The United States is the biggest threat to democracy that ever existed. If you, as a Canadian, I'm sure you might understand that. But, like the geopolitics, I would not want a public utility owned by the United States. Could you imagine anyone who's critical of the United States being allowed to speak on? Nah, fuck that shit. But it's complicated, okay, and that one's complicated, not complex. Different things. I learned that recently. I didn't know that complex and complicated were defined, like as in like they refer to different things. I thought that was quite an interesting. Anyway, that's a digression. But. it depends. The answer is it depends. And anyone who's sort of not really exploring that it depends and what the problem is, and that, so, is there a problem, I don't know. I don't think anyone could do Mark Zuckerberg's job, and anyone who claims they can are probably really not to be trusted and should never be in a leadership role ever, because it means that they don't go into it with the humility that's required to do this kind of job at this kind of scale. It's so anyway, let me just show you so this is Network Propaganda. It's an audio book. You can get it on Audible, but it is just free. It's Google Network Propaganda and the Oxford academic link comes up. It's actually all freely available, so it's all here. But what this does is it actually just shows, this is really interesting. So when I refer to like a lot of this research that's been done about the Fox ecosystem and how they are the large purveyors of bullshit, okay, this is, and how that asymmetry and, this concept of asymmetrical, propaganda, this stuff is well established in the research. And so people go, oh, well, it's a conspiracy. It's like, no, this is where the research is. I love that. That's the newest thing, is everything that I don't like is a conspiracy theory. And I get that from people who literally are engaging in conspiracy theories. It's like, fucking hell. Oh my God. So the American media ecosystem consists of two distinct, structurally different media ecosystems. One part is the right wing. Again, this is simplistic, but is dominated by partisan media outlets that are densely interconnected and insular and anchored by Fox News and Breitbart. The other part spans the rest of the spectrum. Now, again, there's problems as a political scientist in terms of, but we have to meet the Americans where they're at in terms of the political spectrum, and like far left and far right does not mean like left of me and I don't, and far means I'm the further left you are, the more annoyed I am by you. These things have actual meanings. And like none of the mainstream political parties in the United States, neither of them are meaningfully left wing. Okay, you've got like your progressive wing, but they're not. When it comes to legislation, they're not. They don't have meaningful influence at all, right? So, and the same thing with the media. They always will. Again, read your Chomsky or anything like that. But this one is a really interesting book. So this is recent research off the back of 2016. So they in the book they document how these segments of the media system operate differently. They sketch out a framework for understanding the differences in the incentives, mechanics, and practices between the two parts of the media landscape. The model is a stylized description of the relationships, interactions, and feedback loops between elites, media, and the public. Now, again, models. You have to be clear. When we talk about models, we can't possibly... data analysis is really good because you can make those models more granular. But if the model is wrong, then the things that flow on from that are going to be, one of the biggest problems with political science is or even data or behavior or anything like that, or like in psych training as well, or the scales and scores, like getting the right scale to measure things in a meaningful way. That's actually the biggest challenge. But models are always limited. So that's why when people are like left and right, it's like, well, no, first of all, it's the most simplistic model of political, thought. And also, it's more like centre right and right. And also, models in themselves are actually also flawed and don't necessarily account for human complexity or anything like that. Facebook are dealing more with the, it depends human complexity on a day-to-day basis than the US government even. Okay. So anyway, that's why I trust them more than the government, because they're probably more equipped, because they probably have access to more data than a meaningful way. But anyway, do check out that book. I'm fading. I haven't been well this week, so I'm just going to, call it a day. But I'm going to try and I want to try and do more Twitch stuff where we watch for longer. I just need to be able to get my life together and get through this hump of work and all the real things that people do. Not all of us get paid to do this, I appreciate the patrons that I do have, and I appreciate, the whole thing, but this is the world we live in. We're saying Mark Zuckerberg looks weird and repeating Media Matters talking points, or, it's a conspiracy. That's the stuff that makes money, because that's the stuff that the interests want. They want your brain rotted and fucking imploding from the stem outwards. But people who actually sort of know what they're talking about, don't really get a shot. So, and what's really interesting is, okay, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Because I was actually going to say, one thing that I found through diving through a lot of this stuff is how a lot of the culture wars people act a lot like Fox News, in the sense that I've talked about this in previous videos with Fox News. There's only a few reasons you go on Fox News. Reason number one, if you're a left-winger, if you're a good faith left-winger and you go on Fox News, you go on Fox News either if you are not very bright and you make the left look stupid, okay? You are either a former lefty who is useful to them to lend credibility to whatever fucking bullshit that they're trying to spread, or you go on there, you take them to task, and you never get asked back. And that's why with me, I found it very interesting where people would interview me, and I'm open to the idea that it's not because I'm not haven't had media training, and there's lots of reasons why you might not be a good guest on a show, right? I'm not sitting here going, it's because of whatever. It's probably, again, multiple reasons, but I did start to notice a pattern, which was whenever I was saying something that was convenient for the culture warriors to sort of continue their narrative, right? Whether it was about speech or about censorship or whatever, they'd use my ideas and they'd use my shit. But then if I was saying something that was, critical of the sort of that radicalization funnel or the digital aspect, the fact that they leave out the fact that this is largely an online thing where people, it's just, and media, and people are consuming this stuff. It's more about what people are consuming and where they're consuming it, and that they're being nudged. The fact that they leave that stuff out is always, once you pay attention, you go, why are they talking about the digital part of this? Always ask yourself that question. Why are they not talking about how much ad spend? Like Tim Pool's new song, right? And it's you do know that he just paid for ads. Anyone can get anything viral if you throw enough money at it. It's not difficult. You just need enough budget. The more, and I've done that. I used to have a graph, which was the more shit the content, the more money you throw at it, but it will still happen. It'll still, it'll still chart. You just need lots of money. That's how record labels thrive, selling shit pop, and they just throw all of the money at it, and then anyway. But the shit of the content, the more you've got to pay for it, and that increasingly has become to the point where it's pay to play. There's no such thing really as organic content anymore. And you can, I think for $50 US, you can get 10K listens on iTunes paid for by bots. So, it's so easy to game these systems. But no one's talking about that. No one ever talks about it. And it's only when you actually sit and you pay attention, and Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool, they never mention how much they spend on advertising their stuff and promoting their stuff. And also they don't, until you're sort of behind the scenes and you start to interview people or have them interview you, or they go, oh yeah, and then they talk to you, but it never goes you start to notice that sort of curation that happens where it's okay, I know what this is, okay. Yeah, I reckon that beanie really fucking stinks. Oh, yeah. That was the time when I thought that it was a good faith question. The what is a woman question started out in good faith for the most part. Started out, 2016, 2017. It was a valid question that people would ask. Then it started to be asked in bad faith in order to trap people. And then when he took it and stuff, it was just no, I'm out. Fuck these people. Fuck them. I don't know why people think that, he agrees with me on that thing. No, he doesn't agree with you. He's using you. If he didn't have you to parrot his shit, he would have to say what he really believes. He gets to launder his heinous beliefs through radfems. Radfems, they do this every time. They did it with prohibition. It happens all the time. They end up finding themselves aligning with fucking Christian conservatives. And it's just oh my God, And I haven't done a vid react today. Where are we? Here we go. Is it coming up?
Won't somebody please think of the children?
But I need to use those buttons. I need to. Oh yeah. Anyway, but yeah, it's fucking ridiculous. Like the question used to be, the history. I can talk about that history because there's so many people who, I think, if you aren't questioning, I wish I'd never said anything about that issue ever. Like, I wish I hadn't, because I had, again, I was an idealist. I thought that I could just go, you know what, there seems to be a slight clash here in policy, and women, like, you I don't know, like, there's violent shit in Canada is concerning me. And then suddenly you're dragged into this, and it's like, no, I'm not having any part of this. I'm sorry, but no. And then you watch every radfem that, well, they're not radfems, they would, you know, people who identify as radfems. They're people who identify with whatever label, you know, gets them an audience, you know, and then just shit on everyone the second they end up on Rogan or whatever. It's just like, well, okay, well, fair enough. But what I can do is call it out now and fix it now. And you can't, like, and that's probably, again, why I maybe also sympathise with Zuckerberg in this interview as well, because I also know that we all get caught and we have blind spots, especially if you're sort of a creator or you are trying to get in good faith. You're going to make mistakes and you're going to get things wrong. And sometimes you get things wrong in a way that actually hurts people. And, you know, so a lot of this was the context of this was the sort of the turf wars stuff, which was that back in sort of 2016, 2017, I defended Megan Murphy and sort of got plunged into all of that stuff for being banned from Twitter, and I opposed her censorship. I've since sort of gotten a more complex view on it, obviously, but I didn't know what I know now. If I knew what I knew now, you know what I meant, I would have taken a bit more care in what I was saying and who I was talking to. It's just I wish but again, we can only move forward, and again, that's the problem with being one of the few people who who just has their real name. And I've always used my real name and never had to use it. There's plenty of fucking plenty of journalists. I've said this before, and lots of journalists who are high profile journalists who've bullied people anonymously, and I know what their usernames are, and I won't, because, you know, like, I respect that, but, you know, people like me have to stand by what we say and fix it and move forward and push through. And it's easy to just walk away from anonymity. You know, like, there's something about not being anonymous that it's convenient. Like right now, I wish I was, but at the same time, you know, there's benefit in apologizing and moving forward, and, you know, trying to pull people that, you know, maybe you persuaded in the other direction to kind of pull back as well. So, Yeah. So, you know, I think a lot of us are just sick of this shit. And I think the good people will prevail. I always believe that the good will prevail. As much as I won't moan about how the system's rigged in favour of the bad people, I think that more and more their masks are slipping, figuratively and literally. And I think anyone who's paying attention and is a good person, you know, I've been around long enough, I've been on the internet long enough to know that eventually people will get sick of it. It's just that, you know, I hope that this thing is just, you know, people are waking up. You know, like here, the culture wars didn't have the weight in the election that I thought it might. You know, and I think people are just generally sick of the fucking American bullshit. And it was interesting that, like, to go back to Zuckerberg, that he actually said that, you know, you do know that this thing is largely like an American thing and it's annoying for everyone else. It's like, yeah, thanks, Mark. And that's why I trust Mark Zuckerberg when it comes to the sort of more global stuff. Not entirely, because obviously, you know, he's got America brain, but at the same time, he understands the global aspects of some of these things, where a lot of the left in the US are like, it needs to be a public utility. And I'm like, fuck off, it does. I'm not going on a fucking public utility from the United States. Get fucked. No, thank you. Nah. No, thank you. I'd prefer corporation. And that's also because I know people in tech. Let's not forget, 70,000 employees at Facebook, okay? 35,000 committed to fucking content moderation and policy and all these things alone. They do, like, you know, the government doesn't have anywhere near those kinds of resources. But, you know, I'd like to see, I mean, I wish that I had made different decisions, because right now I would like to be pushing for more like community outreach models when it comes to Facebook and working with, you know, so when you get banned, not just being banned, but actually having someone contact you and talk to you, check if you're okay, you know, all those sorts of things. But, you know, that's a resources thing that I don't think necessarily, like if you get arrested or you end up in the emergency department or, you know, that sort of thing, that, you know, you get access, well, again, America exception, but, you know, in Australia, if you end up in the emergency room, you know, you have a social worker that you can talk to and they can help you. And, you know, yeah, half my job is making sure my mother doesn't click random links on Facebook. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is like the elder abuse component of this as well. They're just so selfish. They don't care about anyone but themselves. They don't care about anything other than their right to spread bullshit, their right to scam people, their right to rob people blind. They don't care about the elderly who get scammed. They don't care about the kids who get scammed. They don't care about the radicalization pipeline that they manufacture and stoke the flames of. You know, it's just like, well, okay, you know what? If that means that, oh my God, the laptop story might get suppressed by mistake. Is it a mistake? I don't know. It seemed like the Streisand effect did its thing. Not an issue. Because that network well and truly knows how to get shit shared. So we all saw it. We all know about it. It obviously wasn't that suppressed. So anyway, I'm going to go. I love you. Thank you for the follow. And I'm going to try and do more, like I said, Twitch-centric stuff. I had a Discord. I turned it off because it was too much work, but I'm going to put a Discord back on for patrons and stuff and like general whatever. Again, workload. I got too much real shit to do, you know. But yeah, I'll be back soon. Probably next week. All right. I love you. Take care. Thanks for watching. Yeah.
What a load of old shit!
Good old Nan. All right, I'm going to go. Take care. I'll be back next week.